All right, I'm showing 1 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. I'd like to welcome everyone to the second session of NBAA's National Safety Forum, the event capping off our week promoting excellence in aviation safety. I'm Phil Derner, NBAA Western Regional Representative and your webinar producer. Before we get started, I'd like to show you a few features of this webinar platform. We'll be accepting questions to ask our speakers. To ask a question, please type it in the Q&A window on your screen. All submitted questions will be 100% anonymous from the rest of the audience. This session's presentation deck, along with webinar resources, can be found in the handout section. Also, keep your eye on the public chat as we will be adding links and additional updates throughout the duration of the webinar. With that, I'll hand it over to Ed Bolen, President and CEO of the National Business Aviation Association, to get things started. Ed?
Well, thank you, Phil, and welcome back, everyone, to our National Safety Forum. This year, as you all know, we're focusing on optimizing your personal performance. And with that, we had a terrific session this morning with Greg Farley talking to Daniel Mollicone about fatigue, about sleep, and its importance as part of professionalism. This afternoon, Greg is once again going to moderate our panel, but this afternoon we're going to focus on mental health, making sure we've got our mind in the right place. And to do that, we've got a really terrific speaker. Matt McNeil has 11,000 hours as a pilot. He is also a recognized mental health counselor. His company, Life Effect, works with flight departments, works with commercial carriers, and works with pilot unions. So I know we've got great expertise. And to get us started, Greg, let me send it over to you for our session number 2.
Thank you, Ed. Yes, and I like to get right to the heart of the matter on these because this is something I enjoy talking about a lot. So, Ed, we'll go ahead and I'll introduce Matt McNeil, and he's actually become a very good friend of mine, and he's going to talk about optimizing your personal performance, mental health, and mind. Matt, what do you say? We kick this off and let's get going. Thank you for joining us. There you go.
There we go. Got the mic unmuted. Thanks very much, Ed. Thanks, Greg, for the very kind introduction. And thank you, NBAA, for having me come and get the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning. Today, we're going to talk about optimizing personal performance from a mind perspective. And more specifically, I'm going to cover some early intervention opportunities, and we'll explain what that means, and applicable strategies for optimizing mental health, specifically for pilots. Okay, so approximately 20% of pilots have undetected and unresolved mental health issues, and less than 1%, far less than 1%, will seek any type of assistance for those problems. These issues, they negatively impact their physical health, their behavior, their reliability, their performance, and their overall sense of well-being. And so I think to get us started, to kind of to grease the wheels, if you will, so we're all kind of talking along the same language, we're just going to cover some basic definitions about mental health so we can, hopefully that'll make this presentation a little bit more meaningful. Mayo Clinic has a great definition for mental health. It refers to a wide range of health conditions. And these are disorders that affect mood, that affect thinking, and affect behavior. And examples would be depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, addiction, alcohol, substance abuse, those types of things. And everybody has mental health concerns from time to time. These are normal, but mental health concerns become illness when ongoing signs and symptoms cause frequent stress and, more specifically, start to affect the ability for one to be able to function. The prevalence of mental disorders, just some quick stats for you. 1 in 5 US adults experience a mental illness each year. 1 in 25 adults experience a serious illness, mental illness, and I would say we could really classify this as requiring hospitalization. 1 in 6 people between the ages of 6 to 17 experience a mental illness each year, and suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34, the first being motor vehicle accidents. And I think what's important to say is that 100% of the population will either themselves or have somebody directly connected to them experience a mental illness each year. The prevalence of suicidal thoughts, which we call ideation, among US adults, this is from 2017. The statistics fairly consistent, but it does raise every year over time. And certainly I think with COVID, we're going to see the ramifications of the fallout from that is we're going to see that statistic go up. But the number to really pay attention to here is overall about 4.3% of Americans experience active suicidal thoughts. The prevalence of mental disorders in US adults, anxiety disorders are certainly at the top. About 20% of all mental disorders are anxiety disorders, with substance abuse and depression coming in under that. But again, the number to pay attention to is any disorder. 20% of the population experiences something like that. Less than 50% of people that have mental health issues actually reach out for help. And the median time frame for reaching out is 10 years, a decade, before people will actually reach out for help. So they're experiencing, what we would classify as an illness for up to 10 years before reaching out, which is astounding. Comorbidity is at 45% for multiple diagnosis. And really what that means is comorbidity means that there's one condition that's also joined or creates another condition. So depression and anxiety often go hand in hand. Compulsive sexual behaviors and substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, depression. And comorbidity is certainly the most, what creates so much complication with mental health issues is that it can start out as one thing and it can move into another thing, or they can coexist with each other. And this is what makes mental health conditions the most difficult medical conditions to diagnose, is because of the issue of comorbidity. So, okay, since we're talking about pilots, here's the question. Do pilots have a less propensity for mental illness? Do we have, the idea of the right stuff? Is that what pilots are made of? Let's see if we can figure this out together. So there was a Harvard study that was done in 2016, very well-known study. Perhaps some of you tuning into this have seen this. They surveyed about 3,500 pilots, and about half of them completed the survey, which is a really great participation rate. And these are the survey was limited to part 121, which is commercial pilots, in this particular study. And what they found was 12.6% of the 1848 airline pilots responding to the PHQ-9. And the PHQ-9 is a questionnaire that we use. You go to your family practice doc, they'll issue this. Mental health professionals use it. It's a questionnaire that assesses for depression. And of that, there was 1,430 pilots who had worked within the last 7 days that met the depression threshold on the PHQ-9 total score. And as well, there was 75 participants, or 4.1%, that reported having suicidal thoughts within the last 2 weeks. These are active flying line pilots. And what the study had concluded was that hundreds of pilots currently flying are managing depressive symptoms, perhaps without the possibility of treatment, due to the fear of negative career impact. Although results have limited generalizability, there are a significant number of pilots suffering with depressive symptoms. And I think the most important recommendation that came from this study was that we recommend airline organizations increase support for preventive mental health treatment. It's the important piece here. So when we compare pilots to the general population for suicidal thoughts, again, overall 4.3 for the population, and pilots came in at 4.1. So very closely mirroring the general population. When we look at depression, major depressive disorder in the general population, 7.2%, and pilots was 13.5%. That's actually double the general population. And although anxiety was not screened for specifically in this study, I can tell you in my clinical practice, using anecdotal information, and we've treated a lot of pilots, I would tell you anxiety is probably double what the general population is among pilots. So, true or false? Well, it's false. Now, pilots may have the right stuff when it comes to personality attributes, competencies to be able to do the job of flying, no doubt. But when it comes to susceptibility and resiliency against mental health problems, the data does not support that idea. That has been long held belief for a long time. So what would be some explanations for this? Well, here's some plausible ones. It's the stress of the job. I know that there was a survey that had been done, and they looked at 11 different factors and found that pilots scored in number 3 behind firefighters and military personnel that are deployed in an active combat zone. The effect of displacement on mental health, chronic displacement from home, which pilots have, has negative consequences to mental health. Circadian disruptions and psychiatric disease, absolutely empirically validated. We know that that's an issue with those types of disruptions. Shift work and poor mental health, and certainly there's the stress of regulatory oversight that is stringent, has in the past has been known to be somewhat punitive. I think the stress of that has negative consequences to the mental health of pilots. So this results in barriers to pilots reaching out. Again, remember that the general population takes 10 years. It's a lot longer for pilots. And so these barriers are stigma of being seen or labeled as weak or unstable, fear of medical disqualification. Again, the requirements for medical clearance, especially when it comes to mental health issues, are incredibly narrow. Loss of income or career. Pilots go out on mental health issues. Which leads to the insurance coverage. Depending on your long-term, short-term policy, most insurance policies cover mental health issues for 6 months, whereas they may cover another medical issue for all the way up to age 65, depending on what's going on. So pilots typically, they understand that it's limited coverage, and certainly the damage to professional reputation. And so this results in pilots altogether failing to seek treatment, seeking treatment from professionals that are not trained in mental health. And examples that we see would be, going to a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, an herbalist, a naturopath. All of those professionals are great at what they do, but they are not professionals in treating mental health. But pilots will use that. Pilots sometimes can't find professionals that have experience working with pilots or the FAA. They feel poorly understood, and knowledge of pilots and knowledge of the FAA is absolutely crucial to a pilot being able to navigate going out on medical if they need to, and certainly being able to reacquire their medical certificates. There's lots of well-intentioned providers that do not understand the requirements of pilots and the FAA, and that can lead to disqualification or a very lengthy process for pilots to try to get back. And so what happens is pilots engage in misguided attempts at self-treatment. Certainly alcohol, substance abuse, impulsive behaviors, taking unprescribed medication. They take their partner's medication, or they buy medication illegally off the street, those types of things. Those are the results of that. So, as the study says, preventive mental health is accomplished by, and this is across medicine altogether, but we want to look at, and I would add, it's also safety. We think about aviation safety. Early and accurate identification and then intervention is how we create preventive programs. And so when we think about mental health problems, sadness, fear, worry, stress, those are normal reactions and very adaptive reactions. And they can be concerns, but when left untreated, oftentimes they can slide over into an area of where there becomes a loss of function, which we call illness. And that looks like, depression, anxiety, dependency, addiction, and certainly at the worst, it's suicide. And so it's this sliding scale of things can be okay and fairly adaptive and normal, but can then very slowly slide, sort of covertly slide into illness. And this is often what the progression of mental health problems look like. And then what happens is it manifests itself in symptoms like irritability, just kind of feeling, a little extra irritable, a little extra sensitive, confused thinking, see mood changes, more conflicts at work, just, all of a sudden not really getting along. Sleep issues, as Daniel had talked about in the previous, his presentation this morning. Clinically, I see this is almost the telltale sign. This is one of the biggest indicators is sleep issues. And when the sleep goes, you can bet 100%, if the sleep goes long enough, those things that are normal adaptive concerns, they will very quickly move into the illness category and a complete loss of function. So sleep is a very big marker, a very big issue. And incidentally, when we correct the sleep and we really work on the sleep, I would say oftentimes 60 to 80% of the problems are gone. So sleep is a very, very important factor in how we treat this. And generally, just an overall loss of resiliency is the symptoms that we see when it goes from concern over into illness. And so that decline in function, that becomes the target. That becomes what we need to look for if we're looking for an early intervention strategy. So then the question we would have is, where does this show up? Where do we see this? Well, symptoms, like we talked about, those symptoms, they manifest themselves in behaviors that we can see, that are highly observable, and then it results in consequences that become very predictable. And what that looks like, oftentimes, is behavioral issues like personality conflicts, this person's not getting along with anymore, customer complaints, bid avoid lists. So certainly at the airlines, if you have a seniority list at a corporate flight that's big enough, maybe it's like, I don't want to fly with that person anymore. People just don't like flying with that person. When maybe before that hadn't been an issue. At the airlines, professional standards, and I think on the corporate side, that would be the chief pilot's office, where it's like, why are you not getting along? What's becoming, we call them the frequent flyers at the airlines. They're always in the professional standards program. Those are behavioral markers. Reliability issues, excessive sick calls, frequent leave of absences, unexplained fatigue. Now, that is not to say fatigue. I mean, fatigue is a real issue, and whether you like it or not, certainly at the airlines, Part 117 really got on top of that. I think that's a really great thing in terms of safety and in terms of mental health. But unexplained fatigue would be where it just doesn't really make sense, where somebody may be coming off of 14 days off and they call it fatigue on day one, or before they even start the trip. We call that trip shaving. It's cutting off the beginning of the trip or cutting off the end. Those are some reliability issues that are indicative of these symptoms. And performance issues, right? At its worst, complete psychological decompensations in training or online, or excessive operational deviations or failures. And I would classify that as errors in judgment that become somewhat higher frequency and even at times chronic in nature. Those are some issues. And these three buckets, I like to think of them as ports of entry. That becomes very low-hanging fruit of early intervention opportunities. To get, again, if this is to get at the issues before they slide into loss of function, which we would call illness. And so waiting for a pilot to just, tap out, right? That's the end of the road. The beginning of the road, and that is not where mental health problems exist. So they don't exist in a vacuum of just a complete collapse. And so our approach to dealing with these, which has been in the past, is very reactive in nature. Our approach to dealing with these problems shouldn't be either. The higher the occupational risk, the lower the utilization of any mental health service, period, the end, right? So we know this from the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, police officers, military pilots, right? And that means this includes reaching out to employee assistance programs, even peer support programs, doctors, counselors, religious clergy, family and friends. The higher the risk, the less likelihood of reaching out to anyone. And so I believe, Lift Effect, we believe pilot assistance can and should be proactive via early and accurate identification. Okay, so I guess that's the bad news. The good news, let's get into some maybe good news stuff, some tactical things that pilots can do to keep themselves over in the adaptive side of the scale, not into the sliding into the illness side, is some mental management techniques. And we use this, any pilot that comes through Lift Effect, one of the first things that we get on is creating a framework to solving for when we're just not feeling well up there, whether that's depression or anxiety or anger. I refer them as just activation, states of activation. We're going to use strategies to approach it, not luck. We're going to decrease storytelling, and we're going to manage mental states. I'll explain what that means. So strategy, certainly by definition, would be a planner method, right? A careful stratagem. In this context, I think what it means is it's best if what you're using to solve for the state of activation, it should be scientifically based, empirically validated. It needs to be testable, so you can go out and see if it works. Should be tweakable or flexible enough to fit your individual personality characteristics and your situation. And most importantly, like in any good science, it should be repeatable, which means it may not work all the time, but it should work most of the time. And certainly when in doubt, go to a professional that will give you these types of strategies. Now, on the other side, and let me just add too, a professional doesn't have to mean a therapist. It can mean a trained, qualified coach, therapy or coaching. I think we use them both at Lift Effect. Those are both very good resources. Now, on the other side of strategy would be luck. And that's what often people utilize. They think they may be using strategy, but luck, meaning they're just kind of throwing it against the wall, try to see what sticks. Sometimes it works, but the problem is it usually doesn't. It's often harmful, and there's no reliability in it. Now, luck would be substance abuse. It would be I'm going to go lay on the couch and just eat potatoes, potato chips. It could mean I'm going to go just kind of pick fights to argue with somebody. It could mean it's luck is the equivalent of, like, if you're going to go try to pay your mortgage or your rent, you're going to go to a casino to play slots. You might win, but the problem is next month when you go back, you won't repeat it. So you want to make sure that you're using a strategy. Story. This is, I think, by far probably the most important strategy to use. But storytelling is what we tell ourselves we think is happening. And there's been lots and lots of science that has, replicated the finding that the stories that we tell ourselves about what has happened or what we think is going to happen is centered around a bit of truth, or often it's delusional. It's bonkers. And I always say, if we could all read each other's minds, we probably would all be locked up. We tell ourselves stories all the time. That's part of having a prefrontal cortex, which makes us humans, which gives us self-awareness. It's wired The problem is the prefrontal cortex is a couple million years old, and so it's wired for fear, for freeze, fight, or flight. It's wired for tigers. And so when we're not feeling great, we have a tendency then to tell stories that are based around fear. And those stories are typically not true. And so thoughts are not facts. Now, what story looks like is when the time of attention is future focused, right, we're thinking about what's going to happen, that often leads to anxiety symptoms. And conversely, when we're thinking about the past, that often leads to depressive symptoms. I mean, the greatest description, the most common description of depression I hear from my clients is, it's the statement of, what's the point? Why bother? Nothing's worked, nothing's going to work. That's what depression often looks like, or depressive symptoms. But when we can pull ourselves actually into the present moment, those anxiety symptoms and those depression symptoms either significantly decrease or they extinguish, they go away. Because in this moment, unless somebody is stabbing you, right? In this moment, regardless of what is going on, you're probably okay. Things may not be ideal, they may not be perfect, but you are not being chased by the tiger that the storytelling can lead us to believe that we're being chased by. And in this moment, there is seldom a problem that is insurmountable. So when we decrease the storytelling, we lower symptoms of depression and anxiety. We improve physical health, increase well-being, and we optimize performance. Strategies to decrease storytelling. There's very good science that's there now, where we really understand that role of thinking and the ramifications of it and how to mitigate that. Certainly, attention. We pay attention to what occurs in the moment. Will pull you out of story and into what is real, which is now. Greater awareness of thoughts, physical sensations, emotions, and feelings. Just being aware that our mind is going there will help pull us back into the now, which is awareness. Certainly how we're judging situations. Are we labeling things as good or bad? That can create story. Greater acceptance of what is happening, not attempting to change it, not struggling. It's sort of like when you're waiting in line to get on a flight and then they tell you that it's now 45 minutes late. Just relaxing into that, not trying to change it, will then shut down some of the story and allow you to just kind of hang out for 45 minutes and be all right. Less identification, right? You are not your thinking. You are experiencing your thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. Versus, it's like there's sadness versus I experience sadness versus I am sad. It's a big difference. Not everything you think is true. And again, as I alluded to, there's lots of data that shows what we actually think is not often true a vast majority of the time. It's a version of the truth, but it's not completely true. And then managing states, which I'll get to in the next slide, come and go. And choice, right? Not letting a state take over. Like I'm gonna have some choice and some agency in this. Create room between the impulse and the action, and conscious versus automatic behavior. And the practices that help facilitate this storytelling are hands down mindfulness-based practices. Those are becoming really well known. They're out there. Lots of great applications for this. So those are mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. On the therapeutic level, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. We use that a lot at Lift Effect. Dialectical behavioral therapy, and even for like eating issues, overeating, which is oftentimes a stress response. Mindfulness-based eating awareness training. Those are just some examples of strategies to pull yourself out of the story. And then lastly, mental states. And for our discussion today, I will classify states as resourced versus unresourced. And pilots typically understand this very well when we think about CRM. Resourced, meaning having all your materials, but for our definition, it's being able to maintain the periphery of your environment, right? Not tunnel visioning, in that freeze, fight, or flight response, it's like we're looking for the tiger, right? We tend to block everything out when we do that. When we're resourced, we're using all of our available resources. So just like in the flight deck, if you've got a problem, you start communicating to your first officer, you communicate to the flight attendants, you talk to ATC, you call up maintenance, you start, expanding your periphery and communicating with others. That keeps you resourced. And in the world of sports psychology, they call that a process orientation. The process is the now, maintaining the process in the moment. That leads to greater proactive decision-making. And interestingly, it's engendered by emotions of gratitude, right? Feeling appreciation and connection to others. Again, think CRM, connection to others. Now, unresourced on the other side is where we start to tunnel vision, right? We start to block everything out. And, aviation has great examples of the negative effects of tunnel visioning, certainly in our accident reports. It's when we lose the periphery of the environment, and then the decision-making becomes often very reactive. There is, in those moments, a lack of strategy that is being used. And so that is really very tied into that freeze, fight, or flight response. And the emotions that drive freeze, fight, or flight are fear and anger. And so, those emotions drive us into an unresourced state. And so when you are unresourced and you want to get resourced, you can leverage gratitude and you can leverage interpersonal connection to shut down fear and anger. Gratitude is an antidote to fear. You can't be fearful and be grateful at the same time. You can't be angry and be grateful at the same time. So you can leverage emotional states to expand your periphery, if you will. And so the 1, 2, 3 questions that you want to ask yourself when you're trying to solve for when you're not feeling great, when you're feeling upset, whether it's anxious or sad or depressed or just not right, is one is, am I using a strategy or am I just relying on luck? If you're using luck, get rid of it. Get a strategy. 2 is ask yourself, what role is storytelling playing in how I'm feeling right now? And it will probably be quite a bit, a significant factor. And it's likely much worse in your mind than in reality. And 3 is, am I resourced? If I'm not resourced, I'm going to get myself resourced with gratitude, with getting some connection to others, call a friend, go play with the dog, something where you feel more connected. And then you're ready to approach the problem that's at hand. And so it's that 1, 2, 3 framework. So to conclude, the key takeaways: pilots have the same or greater susceptibility to mental health issues as the general population, and I think maybe in some respects more. Pilots suffer with unidentified and untreated mental health issues, just like the rest of the population, but certainly pilots. Pilots have significant internal and external barriers to reaching out for help. Behavior, reliability, and performance concerns provide early intervention opportunities for these mental health issues before they become full-blown illness, loss of function. And use the 3 magical questions to experience significant improvements to your mood and your performance. And so with that, thank you so much for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Matt, thank you very much. There's a lot there, and mental health. Oftentimes, when we talk about it, when we mention mental health, we immediately go to the far end of the spectrum, the 9 and the 10s on your scale. But what we're really talking about is how even at the 2 and the 3, the individual can self-intervene, right? And that's through the strategies Absolutely. That you've given, and if you can, it's kind of I think you and I even talked one time about the old adage of, if I question as to whether I'm crazy, am I crazy? And so I think, it goes into the hey, if I can recognize that I'm starting the story tell, and hey, I need to get to a resource state, you're actually in a pretty good spot right there. And now you just need to kind of go back to your internal toolbox. And it's much like in an airplane, right? You get off on a checklist. You don't keep going forward. You may have to go back and say, okay, I need to start this checklist over. And what do I need to do to keep moving forward? And then what we'll talk about and introduce tomorrow is on the organizational side. Okay, now we're getting into the 5s. So we're not into the full fitness of duty questions but we're into the, hey, we're moving. What can an organization do to intervene? And that's through the behavioral indicators, the reliability indicators, and the performance indicators.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think, the behavior, reliability, performance, it's not a witch hunt. The spirit of this is not to say, oh, let's go in there and let's get them. It's when you look back, like when you do accident investigation, when we do safety audits, right? When there's an incident, you look back, there's a paper trail that goes on for miles, right? And so this is the paper trail early, before the total collapse, before it's, the pilot's either has to tap out or has to go do the carpet dance, right in the chief pilot's office, right? These are areas, I mean, and we've done this at Lift Effect. We'll go back and look and we'll see, oh my gosh, this popped up in behavioral issues. There's like all these complaints, and now there was performance markers where it was like, just a huge uptick with that pilot's, performance issues, whether it was caught or not. This is to get in early, and the spirit is to reach out and help before it becomes a disciplinary issue, or worse yet, a safety issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And I think we've talked about that before too, of if you've had somebody who's been a good employee all along, and then all of a sudden now they're late, and they're missing show times, their trips are being delayed, or they're calling off. Under current systems, you're like, hey man, you got to cut this out, or hey, you get some time off unpaid. But now we're going, okay, well, maybe there's something else going on, and that's what we'll kind of introduce tomorrow is what process that we can set up as a flight department to help and get these people into the safety management system.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you, SMS. This is safety management. If you want a comprehensive safety management system, I don't see how if you're not approaching these issues and offering valuable resources to fix, right? I don't think you're SMS compliant. And so having a dedicated assistance program to look at early intervention opportunities, and then as you've alluded to, then now what, right? So at the airlines, they've relied on peer programs, which has many benefits. There are benefits of peers, but peers are not professionals. And I think there's an over-reliance actually on peers to try to assess whether something is significant or not. They're not in a position to do that. They're not trained to do that. They're not qualified to do that. Now, on the corporate side, it's harder because corporate flight departments are tiny, right? Everybody knows everybody. So certainly at Lift Effect, what we've tried to do is be that resource for the corporate flight department. Say, you know what? We don't know what to do. We're not sure if it's an issue or not, but I think this person might need some outreach, might need some help. So on the front line, it's going to have to be somebody in the corporate flight department. I think training everybody in that department to be able to identify some of these early markers, but then you got to have a place where you can hand it off, in a place that you can trust, where you can work hand in hand with them.
And that kind of your response there kind of goes into a question that just came up of what can we do, if we identify a coworker that may be suffering from some of the challenges outlined. I mean, that's a very tough spot, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Of being in that moment is the wrong time to be having this conversation, talking about this stuff before. But let's go to help this individual. I'm flying with somebody, and let's just say they're going through a nasty divorce, and they are unresourced. They're storytelling. What can I do without potentially damaging this person's career when it's not necessarily clinical? We just got to get them some help. What can this person do?
Yeah, I would reach out to them directly. Just say, hey, you know what? I'm just concerned about you. I care about you, and I think you're struggling. You know, oftentimes they'll just open up. If it feels like they don't want to open up, give them a resource, right? Give them something like, hey, you should really call this number. These people are trained they work with pilots, they understand pilots. But I think you've got to, the first line of defense, I mean, in suicide awareness, it's the community. And when you change the community to identify this stuff, suicide goes down. By the time it gets to the professionals, we'll handle it at that point. But it's getting in there early. So I think training people up on mental health awareness and how to approach those conversations, that has really good impact and good outcomes. But if you just shove it under the rug, it's not going to get better. So I would say go to them directly and just tell them that you're concerned.
Yeah, and I think expressing that concern can help show them that there is somebody that's caring about them, right? And so now we're moving into that positive emotions that are going, and then if they're not responding to positive emotions, it may be beyond what you could, and we need to take other action. But I think getting them help and showing them concern is very important. I mean, we can go down that path a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the connection to others piece, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. When we feel connected to others, we start to open up. And so just saying, hey, it seems like you're struggling. It seems like you're having a really hard time. And like, I'm concerned, or I care about you, and I'm here for you. I think sometimes that opens up the window enough for them to not only resource themselves, but then actually maybe even reach out and to get professional help.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And we have another question. So this one's kind of interesting because we've talked a little bit about this on the side. And do you think mental health will become something that is addressed as early as initial flight training? And it loosely is through the I'm Safe checklist, but that's not what we're talking about. But generationally, the new generation, the millennial generation that's entering the pilot, not just the flight training, but they're entering the ranks as experienced pilots now. This is very common for them to talk about. This isn't as much of a stigma for that generation. That comes with a caveat, right? They're far higher wound than our generation. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's no, and there's actually a study that I think it was Blue Cross Blue Shield did less than a year ago, where it found millennials have much worse. I mean, they're slated to die 10 years younger than Gen Xers because of highly correlated to poor mental health, much earlier onset of these issues. Yeah, I think that they're much. My experience, certainly at the airline, is that the millennial generation is much more transparent about mental health. They're more apt to actually reach out for help because chances are they already have, maybe in their teenage years or when they were younger, they had counseling for their parents got divorced, or maybe they're having issues at school. So I think generationally, there's a greater acceptance and openness to seeking professional help, but yet they are way stressed out compared to, I think we're all stressed out, but the effects of that appears to be more significant to millennials. And I think that certainly social media and the sort of the I'm not good enough, I should be more pressure that they put on themselves is a big factor to that. But the idea of, is it going to be addressed in initial flight training? I hope so. But if we don't make a push, it won't.
I think that's what
it's all about, the push.
And that's what we're doing here, right? We're trying to get it to where we're starting to have these conversations, and hopefully get the industry to not have a stigma when we're talking mental health, and then that'll just hopefully ripple down into it's okay to talk about it.
Well, and I think too, making this as an integrated part of a safety management system, then it forces the issue. That's to me, that's how you get systemic change, is to build it into the system. So it's addressed and it's captured and it's treated.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So going to, and this maybe goes back to the initial question that we talked about in helping to a coworker. How important or how valuable is empathy when you're talking to a peer? Is it kind of essential? Does it help with that, getting them into a resource to know that someone cares and the positive?
Yes. And I go for empathy over sympathy any day, because sympathy is, I'm so sorry that this is happening. Empathy is, let's figure out a way to help you. And so, but empathy is, I think it's a must. I think empathy, having great empathy is I mean, there's actually even good research on the positive effects of empathy over sympathy, and not saying don't be sympathetic, but it's really more about, there's an issue. What should we do? How can we help? How can we get started in helping you start to figure this out? So yes, great question.
Yeah. So the comment and COVID making the stress and mental health worse.
Yeah.
And how has it had an effect on the mental health issues? And let's just be a little bit more specific to aviation.
I've had to hire people just because of COVID to handle the amount of pilots that are reaching out. I mean, anytime there is furloughs, we know that bankruptcies go up, divorces go up, and unfortunately suicides go up. And so, but COVID has had a devastating effect on the mental health of pilots. They are stressed to the hilt. Management is stressed to the hilt. The pilots are stressed. People don't feel safe flying around. Certainly add in the political climate of how volatile it is. And I think it's had a very bad effect, not just for pilots, but for everybody, but certainly for pilots, because we are essential workers, and our industry, aviation, has been just really smashed on this. I mean, on the corporate side, I think it's a little bit better, but still, there's corporate flight departments that are suffering, that are laying off people as well. So,
and to your point, it is, I think, a lot of the stress here is the uncertainty. I mean, we as pilots, we are very much of, this is my plan, this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I take control. I mean, that's what makes a good pilot, right? The automation or the plane's not doing it, you make it do what you need it to do.
Yes.
And we're in a situation where we've lost that ability. I mean, is my job safe? And your managers, they can't necessarily tell you because they don't know. And we don't know they talk the next wave, they talk about not, and we just don't know. There's so much uncertainty, and that adds to the stress, because now that fills that, now you've got this big gap for storytelling. I don't have a story, so I'm going to make up one. I don't have the facts.
And that's what the mind will do. I mean, we are looking for the tiger that's going to come out and eat me. We're wired for that. Every human being is absolutely wired for that. And so, you add in uncertainty, you add in a biological contagion of pandemic level, and now that's a perfect recipe for, like, oh my gosh, I'm being attacked. We've had a lot of pilots that have immunocompromised people at home, like a spouse or a child, and the stress of, I got to go out to work, and now I don't know what I'm bringing home. Mm-hmm. Some of these guys are living in their garage. I mean, they're quarantining themselves in their garages for 2 weeks before that. We've never seen anything like this before. So a lot of challenges.
There's a good question, and I think it would be a kind of I think we're getting towards the end, but let's hit, what about team building exercises or team checks that can help companies to self-identify? And what can we do as a department? Are there things that we can do to internally without to be proactive, besides integrating it into an SMS? Are there exercises, team building events? I think it's a very good question. It's kind of it's going beyond the, we're even being more proactive to the proactive solution, right? We're trying to encourage healthy mental fitness even before it becomes an issue.
Yes, and we do at Lift Effect. Oftentimes, we'll do suicide awareness training for flight departments. We'll do mental health awareness training. I think training, education is the key, and having organized training events where we're gonna because a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about this. They kind of get, they get skittish around it. And having organized training around it says, no, you know what, we're gonna do this as a department, as a group. We're gonna approach this and get some professional training and get some professional resource and get our lips talking about it. I think just getting folks to talk and to get comfortable around that. I mean, this is the critical incident response model in many respects. So I think that's a great question. I think team building is a great way to build greater awareness and more proactive participation in addressing mental health issues that affect performance and affect reliability.
And team building to that is you're building the team, you're establishing connections to others, which is going back to the resource state. It's one of the components, right? Connection to others.
Yeah. And I think, we're rallying as a group around this issue. That is team building. It's rallying around a cause and rallying around something that that is beneficial and to be true. One great question. Yeah.
One thing on, and I lost my train of thought here. I'm trying to read over here.
That's me all the time.
I think so. One of the I know where I was going to go. So you were talking about having a group, and I've stood up and I've talked about this at the National Safety Forum, and a lot of people in the room go, I don't know why they're talking. This doesn't involve me, but I think privately, we know probably 20% of the group in attendance is going, man, I wish I'd have heard this earlier, or hey, this is going on with me. But they may not publicly stand up and say, hey, this is affecting me right now. But you are helping those people sitting silently in the room, because we know they exist. So even having a talk about this, even if most of the people go, oh, come on, this doesn't happen here. We know it's happening to somebody probably in that room right there.
That's old school. I got no patience or time for that, to be honest. It's like that ship sailed a long time ago, and people can say, do pilots have mental health? Like, yes, they do. We know this is true. The data's there. It may not be happening to you, but it is happening to somebody directly connected to you, whether you're aware of it or not. And so I tend to, I had lectured for a decade on trying to convince, the industry that pilots have mental health problems, right? But now I think we know that I shouldn't say that because I got a cat, but cat's out of the bag. Like we know it. And so I just have moved beyond that. I just moved past that, and I can appreciate the resistance to it, but that's not helping the pilots that are suffering that we're treating every day. And so I think just moving past it and starting to implement change is how we change the conversation. It's kind of like alcoholics and pilots was like, you couldn't talk about that in the 70s. And then finally HIMSS came around. They're like, oh yeah, it's a big problem. Like, and now mental health is center stage. It's there. It's time. It's time.
I agree. And so this one question is something that you and I have been working on. And yes, we talk pilots, and we're talking a lot of pilots here, but one of the things that we'll introduce the term tomorrow is a flight department dedicated assistance program. And that is, yes, it does apply to maintenance. It does apply to flight attendants,
Absolutely.
schedulers, and dispatchers. No one is immune in this. And I mean, it's a nomenclature thing. We talk pilots, but really, yes, we're talking pilots, but the term is greater than the pilot. We're talking aviators.
It's true concept. We're
anybody. And I think SMS, fatigue risk management, and what we propose in the fitness for duty policy is consistent with that we're not talking pilots. We're talking anyone that has their hand in the safety cookie jar or the operation of the aircraft.
I agree.
Is covered.
100% high five. Yeah. Anybody that's in a safety critical position is part of the team and is in a safety position. And so they are not immune, and they should absolutely be part of a flight department assistance program. 100%. Not just pilots. It's a crew effort. Yep.
So there's a very important question here. I think we can leave people with, but the one up here I wanted to get to, it's been sitting here in the queue, is you talked about insurance companies don't always do this for, recognize this or treat this for more than 6 months. I mean, it's become a big problem. I mean, this is a nationwide, worldwide epidemic on this. And
yep.
I think the thing is the biggest one is we got to start talking about it more openly and get rid of the stigma so that people are getting treated. I mean, the thing is we know very few people get treated. So the insurance companies are going, hey, people are taking care of this on their own. But I think you and I agree. But the last question I want to get to, because we're down to just a couple minutes, is there a phone number or organization pilots can reach out if they need help knowing confidentiality is assured? I mean,
yes.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, there are certainly suicide awareness lines. It's not just for suicide, but those are not mental health professionals, but they're people trained in suicide awareness. Those are great resources. You can just call up there's lots of suicide awareness lines. I think there's a national number in them, so I don't have it offhand. Lift Effect has become that. I mean, we just say, just call, you can call us, 303-808-4617. There you have it. I would look at maybe community clinic, community services that offer that. That's all I can think of. Oh, somebody just posted the suicide hotline number at 1-800-273-8255. There you have it.
Thank you.
Looks
Ed?
like we lost Greg.
I think I'm here.
There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. It was but thank you, Matt. It's a very good conversation. And Ed, I'll turn it back over to you.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Greg and Matt. That was a very important session. I think its relevance, particularly in the time of COVID, just enormous. And I'm really happy to see that we're talking about this. This is part of a overall comprehensive program that is including sleep, including mind, and tomorrow we'll be focused on body. So I think this has just been a great day today for the National Safety Forum. I want to remind everybody again, these sessions are recorded. They'll be available on October the 12th. You can go back and revisit what you have witnessed. You can also share this with others. And when we're talking about sleep, when we're talking about mental health, it's important we all do our part to make sure we understand what is going on and we help others be part of that too. We are a community, and I'm so glad it came up that we're not just talking about pilots. We're talking about the entire aviation profession, and that's really what professionalism is all about, making sure we're our best in helping others to be that as well. So again, thank you to Greg and Matt. We'll look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow morning, once again at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where we will do optimizing your performance, the body. And then, of course, tomorrow afternoon, we will conclude our National Safety Forum with the chair of the NTSB, Robert Sumwalt. So, Phil, I'm going to send it back to you as we close out. But once again, thanks, everybody, for being here. The National Safety Forum and part of our Excellence in Aviation Safety Week.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And as Ed mentioned, this session has been recorded and will be available starting Monday, October 12th at pathlms.com/NBAA. We'll be back with you tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern for the third session of NBAA's National Safety Forum called Optimizing Your Personal Performance Body. To our participants, thank you again for joining us and have a safe day.